City of Salem, City Council Committee on Administration and Finance, co-posted with the Committee of the Whole, met in the Council Chamber on Monday, February 10th, 2025 at 6 p.m. for the purpose of discussing the matter of $80,000 to fund bollard installation design plans on the Essex Street pedestrian mall. Notice of this meeting was posted on January 30th, 2025 at 8:58 a.m. In attendance, we have the entire A&F committee, Councilor Davis, Councilor Harvey, Councilor Stott, and Councilor Watson-Felt, and myself. From the Committee of the Whole, we have Councilor Masillo, Councilor Hopworth, and President Krasniewski. Also attending tonight is Dave Kucharski, Director of Transportation, Chief Miller, Chief of Police, and Lieutenant Tucker. These funds would go towards creating design plans for bollards and other barriers on the pedestrian mall for controlling traffic, protecting pedestrians, and enhancing security. You all have the design study proposal from Bowman, and for anyone in the public to find it, just go to the city calendar, click on the meeting, and then click in the agenda. There's a live link to the backup documentation. Then you click on A&F, and then item number 35, the Bowman Essex Street bollard design. There were a couple of items in the design study proposal that kind of caught my attention that might be helpful. Is the project will involve the installation of both fixed and retractable bollards, which I find interesting, and also cost estimates will be included for each option, allowing the city to determine the best approach for the installations. And first, we will hear from Dave Kucharski, and then we will take questions and discussions from the council, and I will take public comment at the end of that. And also, Councilor Varela is joining us remotely tonight. Thank you. So we'll welcome Dave Kucharski up. And thank you for providing the study information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilors. Just to give a little background, Dave Kucharski, Director of Transportation. Just to give a little background, a few months ago, I met with staff from the Mayor's Office, Police and Fire, as well as DPS to discuss better ways to control vehicular access to the pedestrian mall. During our discussion, we had consensus that we essentially need to develop a design plan. I suggested we reach out to one of our on-call contractors who might have experience doing design such as this. I discovered that Bowman did. I engaged with them in a discussion. We had them present some of their experience via Zoom meeting with the same staff that were in that first meeting. We put together a simple scope for them to provide, and that's the document you see before you, which essentially focuses on 4 locations that provide currently vehicle access to the ped mall. And what we're hoping to do is have a kickoff where we walk the site. We have pertinent city staff walk the site with the designer to discuss not only locations for where we want to see them exactly in the space, but also the type. So we do identify retractable and we call fixed barricades, but there's more that obviously needs to be done. We have to know what's in the ground, especially for the retractable. So the intent is that we'll work with the designer to really put out a plan that they'll help us as part of this. They'll help us put together the bid documents that go out. They'll help us review any bids that come in, and then they'll even be part of overseeing the work once it goes into construction. So that's essentially what the document that we shared with you sort of lays out. So happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Yes, Councilor Marcillo.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about their experience, where they've installed the bollards or where they've designed them?
They've done some universities. I apologize, I don't know exactly the locations, but I can share those with you. But they've done design work in other parts of the country. They shared with us around arenas and campuses where they know they have large amounts of pedestrian activity and they're trying to control that vehicular access. So they shared with us this information. I'm happy to provide that with you all, but we do have experience in the country designing these and working with vendors who fabricate and then install them.
Do they have any municipal experience, or is it universities?
I think it's working with cities, but again, I can go back and.
All right. And then secondly, when you're talking about knowing where the utilities are, isn't the city providing that information? They're not doing that, are
Correct.
they?
We're providing that to them, but I'm not certain we have all. The city itself has some of that information. When we were looking at some of the designs for the retractable, there's a lot that goes on underground. So I think part of it is we have to see if it works, and it may not work in certain locations where we're thinking in others. So that investigation has to be done, and that's also accounted for if we need to do more like deep radar penetrating to see what's down there before we really open things up. So that's also part of this effort.
Is the goal to maximize the pedestrian space? So what I'm thinking of is like on Central Street and Derby Square, is it to maximize the area so that they're pushed back away from the pedestrian mall as much as possible?
The goal is to maximize or control the access of the vehicles into and out of the space. For my part, it's to make sure that whatever we put either below the ground or on the surface isn't creating any accessibility issues for pedestrians. So again, I think that's just part of this process that we'll embark with them, is to figure out how best to control the access while also maintaining pedestrian access to the space.
Okay. This isn't you. This is more a comment on the pedestrian mall itself. It's really not accessible, and so I hope whatever you guys decide to do doesn't further increase the issues of accessibility for mobility challenges. I'm hoping at some point we can redesign the whole pedestrian mall so that it's not a trip hazard for just about everybody, whether you have mobility issues or not. But so I wanted to kind of point that out as this is great for keeping cars off of it, when we want to keep cars off of it, I guess. And is that part of the plan? Is there going to be a written policy for when these bollards are used?
So we already have ordinances in place where we restrict vehicle access from 11 to 2 each day.
Do we?
We do. I mean, do people follow that? That's, we issue tickets. We try to work in conjunction with police to get the trucks out of there. So that was part of the discussion. It's not just focused on October when we know we have heavier pedestrian volumes, but how do we control the access year round and make sure we can enforce the ordinance better? So that's one reason for the retractable bollards allows more control. You can access it. There's even, and again, I'm not an expert on these. I'm learning as I go as well, where you can have timers for these things to come up and down. So I think that's part of the discussion that we're hoping to have with the vendors.
Okay. I have to say, the $80,000 to me was a lot of money for just the design. But you're saying, is part of this also managing the project when it's installed?
Yep, they lay out all the tasks, so it's design,
so
the bids, and then overseeing.
And do you think that management part is something that people in the city are not capable of doing once they have all of the information from Bowman on the project?
I mean, we do this a lot for various projects. If we typically will sometimes have the designers be sort of the clerk of the works on site to answer questions, because obviously, as detailed as your plans could be, once you're in the dirt, things can arise and questions could be, need answers to. So I think for us, it's making sure that we have sort of that follow through with who was involved with the design plans be involved. I think, we will sometimes bring in other third-party contractors to be sort of on the scene to answer questions. So it varies. I think given the intent of this, we want to make sure we get it right. So having the people who are involved in the design be involved in the actual then implementation, that was the thinking behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I get the benefits. I just wonder if, I don't know. I guess the traffic light situation at Wilson and Jefferson is too fresh in my mind, and I feel like we're too hands off on that. And I'm not pointing any fingers at anyone, and that was managed by a contractor, and it's not done yet, and they've had months. And it's a little bit frustrating when the city could provide the signs and put them up, but instead it's still under the contractor's domain, and so I'm just voicing my frustration here and trying to understand whether the $80,000 is truly a benefit. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Stott.
Thank you, Chair Merkel. Councilor Marcillo asked a lot of my questions. Specifically, I'll just touch on the 80,000 does seem really steep to me, especially when less than half of that goes towards the design, which seems to be really the crux of what we need Bowman for. All of the other things, utilities, construction work, bids, seems to be more in our wheelhouse, and I'm not quite sure why we're outsourcing that. I had more questions, though, kind of stepping up a little higher level, and let me preface all of this by saying I fully support this idea and this project. I think I have brought it up multiple times when different conversations have been in front of us, like about fences or parades. I do feel like some sort of retractable process to stop vehicles from going down the pedestrian way is sorely needed. It's something that's seen around the country and especially around the world in other pedestrian only areas. At the very first task of design development, which I think is definitely something I fully support, outsourcing, getting to somebody that has this as a specialty. The task that we're given them, 3 questions I have around the design development. It says there's going to be a kickoff meeting with city staff and stakeholders. Do you already have who those stakeholders would be identified or ideas of who they would be? The second question, it talks about speaking about project goals. I think you briefly said what the project goal was, but if we could just mention that again. And then desired design features, which I think might go back to who you're thinking about having as stakeholders in the group.
Don't have stakeholders identified yet. That's something I'd be working with the mayor to help identify. Obviously, staff from police, fire, DPS, either myself or someone from my department would be involved in that sort of walkthrough. You mentioned about the goals, again, we're trying to enhance the pedestrian safety, so we're trying to better control vehicular access to this space. That's really the goal, I think. And then how those features interact with the rest of the streetscape in that space. But I think primarily it's controlling the access to improve the pedestrian safety.
Thank you. I would just make a comment about stakeholders to make sure that we have lots of residents on the pedestrian way. They're not driving their vehicles down there, but lots of residents that I think would want to be involved, as well as businesses that I'm sure utilize it currently for deliveries. So just make sure, I'm sure perhaps the Ward 2 councillor might have some more feedback there, but I think that stakeholder group really needs to be vetted through to make sure that it doesn't come as a surprise to anyone. Speaking towards the project goals of better control of vehicular access, do you know what control we have in place currently? And this might be more of a question for the chief or Lieutenant Tucker, but I know you said we have an ordinance in place that limits vehicular traffic down there. Do you know if we've issued any, again, this might not be for you, any tickets or any sort of enforcement data of what we're doing now for control?
So we have signage up, and I have as part of the rounds, I have parking enforcement go out and issue tickets. I don't have exact numbers. I don't know if the police department as well have specific numbers for the ped mall, but it is in the ordinance. It is signed. We just actually revised the signage to make it clearer and put those up at each ends. But again, it's part of what parking enforcement does. It's out. So that doesn't mean we catch everybody. No.
So can parking enforcement enforce moving vehicle violations, or just if they're parked there?
Parked, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't know if there can be any additional. I don't know if you have any feedback on that one.
Thank you. And for the record, this is Lieutenant Tucker. Thanks for coming up.
Is this thing working? Okay. So in response to some complaints passed along by the mayor, we did some selective enforcement there, and we tried to do it periodically. We've written a couple of tickets and issued quite a few verbal warnings to UPS and FedEx and different companies that deliver their people that were outside of the hours or within that 11 to 2. And this control point would be really to firm that up, and it's really not manageable to be there every single day to catch new people on the route, or people who, backslide and decide to go back down there for their convenience. The system would prevent that and obviously promote the safety of all the pedestrians there.
Actually, if I may just follow up to that, I'm actually not, I'm not aware of, off the top of my head, what the ordinance is for vehicle. Did you say 11 to 2?
There's no deliveries 11 to 2, no passenger vehicles permitted.
Between 11 and 2?
Anytime.
Anytime.
Anytime. And that's obviously through traffic, lost people, the signage there to say don't drive a car down there, and then deliveries are permitted from the morning delivery hour till 11, and then 2 until the evening hours. They're permitted.
Okay. I thought it was stricter than that. So, thank you. I would then also say, as part of the stakeholder and design development, that I know we're saying we have an ordinance in place for no vehicle traffic, but perhaps that timing of that is definitely something we should look at. I don't think we should necessarily design something just to totally match our ordinance, but perhaps we restrict deliveries to earlier in the morning or later at night. I don't even, at night just doesn't make sense to me after 2, that those hours don't make a lot of sense. So, okay, thank you for answering that. I think that was it for project goals. For better control of vehicular access. So my 2 comments would be to make sure that the stakeholders involved really encompass all, including business, delivery, police, any changes to ordinance as needed. And then my 3rd question about the design features and streetscape, to make sure that the Historical Commission, SRA, all of those I'm sure are going to have perhaps feedback on the design down there. I'm pretty sure it's the SRA district, so I'm sure that will be part of the permitting process, but I wouldn't want you to get all the way to the permitting process and have feedback.
I'd have to look and see if that would fall under their purview, because this is for safety measures. And I don't think necessarily it would, but I'd have to go back and check.
Yeah, it would probably be similar to the fence situation where you'd be presenting it, but I'm sure it would be, we're all on one team presenting. Thanks.
I just actually had a follow-up question. With the delivery restrictions, and you might be able to utilize these, for better enforcement, that delivery trucks can't come on. But how would that affect if you have a physical barrier now to enforce the restrictions for delivery trucks? Would emergency vehicles factor into that, because they'd be up and now there would be a physical barrier? So just curious then how that works.
Each location, the design we were, the initial draft design we were presented with, each location had a control box. So fire or police or ambulance could have access to that to raise or lower the bollards, so they could. It's a pretty quick process. The fire department seemed to be on board with it.
So it's it's literally right there, so it's a very quick process. Okay, I was just curious about that. Thank you. Councilor Hapworth?
Thank you, Chair. Not being a member of the committee, I think this did a good job of hitting a lot of the major points of entry. As I think about it, I think there's 5. I can think of 5 ways to get on the pedestrian mall. I think this covers maybe 3 of them or 3.5 of them. The other, I guess, 2 or 1.5 are right outside of here, 1 Salem Green. There's a way for cars to get in there. I don't know if that was discussed as a place we might want to consider putting some sort of a barricade to keep cars off the pedestrian mall. And the other spot is Derby Square. I see you mentioned it You list it here. I assume it's probably outside of Count Orlocks at the end there where it hits the pedestrian mall. The Derby Square itself, near the Lobster Shanty, Front Street, that area, is a gathering spot. Tour groups meet there. There's a farmer's market there. It seems like a potential target if somebody wanted to drive a car that would be concerning to me. Have we discussed pedestrianizing Front Street? I can't think of a reason why it would need to be open to vehicle traffic other than emergency vehicles. I'm just curious if that has played into that. And then if you could talk about I guess we call this One Salem Green. I don't know what this is. I think there's a name for this pathway here, but that space as well.
The intent of this effort is not to look at Front Street or make that another pedestrian way at this time. I think the intent of the walkthrough is to identify if there's other things that we might have missed. So I think to have collectively fire, police, and other stakeholders to walk the site to identify, is there more areas where we should have the contractor focusing on a design? So that would be captured in that exercise up front.
If maybe the chief could let us know about, I guess that area around the farmer's market does seem concerning to me, so just curious what your thoughts are.
Thank you, Chief Miller.
So a lot of the thinking about this was generated as a result of the attack in New Orleans. But I think, as I've expressed before, a lot of this stuff keeps me up at night and has since I arrived in Salem, and I think my predecessors as well. It's not possible to safeguard every pedestrian, alas, right? Just the act of walking across the street makes one vulnerable to a vehicle, either an unintentional vehicle strike or somebody looking to do harm. What my priority is in backing these changes and what I'll express to the consultant is, it seems to me we should have a better line between what is truly a pedestrian area and one where pedestrians share the area with cars. And in terms of, I think certainly the pedestrian mall is the place to start, because that, when you're walking down there, you kind of think you are safe from cars. So I think my highest priority is to safeguard pedestrians on the mall. In terms of expanding that to other areas, I think in general, I think it's a worthwhile consideration. The next thing we're going to think about is the common, which will be a whole separate budget consideration and will be more expensive, by the way, just because of sheer size. When it comes to haunted happenings, and maybe this is not necessarily the forum for it, I think there's a whole separate set of considerations when we shut down more streets, because this is a very similar, our celebrations are very similar to what was going on in New Orleans at the time of that attack. So that's a roundabout way of saying, yes, I'm open to conversations about closing off greater areas, such as Derby Square. I think there are all sorts of complications, including, from what I understand, there are 3 parking spaces, resident parking spaces, that are deeded where they have to basically drive through Derby Square. So will be a more complicated task.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would understand the complications. The pedestrian mall, and I guess in my mind, it does seem to sort of spill down onto Derby Square a little bit. So anything we could do to protect the people there, whether it's closing Front Street or doing something with barricades in that spot there, I think would be worthwhile to explore. But thank you.
Councilor Watson-Felt.
Thank you, Chair Merkel. While you all are standing here, I have a couple of comments and some questions, but mostly just some comments, I think. So for starters, the $80,000 is a lot of money, granted. But in my experience as presidents of nonprofits who have done large-scale projects, $80,000, which includes project management, is not unwieldy, especially when it comes to such a unique design for such a state-of-the-art protective option. So I am in support of this. and I appreciate all the conversation around it, but I did not balk at the 80,000 once I read this today, so I appreciate the additional information. I do have some specific questions. When there are areas that specify a single retractable bollard, what is that width of protection area? So the Central Street one particularly, like where, and how does that affect the trolley? And what does it really do for protection coming up onto Central Street? Or is it at Pamplemousse? Like, walk me through that one.
Again, this was just an idea of
Okay.
roughly where it needs to go, but the design will flesh all of that out, and we might see 2 makes more sense, or
Right.
3. So it's just to give the contractor a starting point.
That these are the major
Yeah.
throughways. I do agree with Councilor Hapworth. I think we want to look at 1 Salem Green, that entryway as well, because I agree. I understand Councilor Hapworth's concerns around the Derby Square area, but again, there's a lot of additional complications. One of the questions I do have, so just for the public's awareness, I have interacted with these in real time, in real life in Stockholm. There was an accident, there was a vehicle accident in a shared pedestrian vehicle area, and the police arrived and bollards went up and crowds backed off immediately. And when I was reflecting on that experience in reviewing this project, one of the things I thought of as a pedestrian is that it also is an incredible alert system that says, look, if I see these things going up, I'm going to want to give space anyways. If I see these things going up and I see an emergency responder, I'm getting out of there, right? Like, so there's actually a lot of, there was a reaction as a physical pedestrian present in a foreign space that had me go, oh, something's happening, right? So I also like that there's that sort of immediate alert system component to this if they were to have to go up in an emergency situation, which I appreciate. One of the questions for anyone, but I think Chief, I'm looking at you on this, unless you direct otherwise, is that if you know, sort of how quickly are these responsive in a large crowd situation if there were an emergency event?
Are you talking about how quickly can they be deployed?
Like, how quickly do they go up? Does that cause, what's the order of events? Do you know what I mean? Do bollards go up and then people show up? Do people show up and then bollards go up? Like, how do you use them as a crowd control component?
I guess I envision, I mean, I don't envision these as crowd control. I envision them as purely as
Just
pedestrian.
barriers, okay.
You know, there'll be it's a combination of fixed and
Yep. Yeah, they
kind
come
of
up,
thing,
yeah. That's what they did in Stockholm. Vert.
but that they would be deployed during all times when, except when the deliveries were allowed on the mall. In my experience, they come up, you know, within 30 seconds
Yeah.
or so. You know, they're not instant. They wouldn't, you know, if you were facing an attack, you wouldn't be able to get it up.
Yeah.
In
Fast enough.
Yeah. So it's, you know, they're slow, is what I'm saying, from an emergency standpoint. But I think I envision them deployed most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, during times when we have real crowds on the mall, they'd be deployed all the time, except when an emergency vehicle came, and then the emergency personnel would have the ability to raise and lower.
Excellent. That's really helpful.
But to come back to one of Councilor Hapworth's questions, one of the purposes of the walkthrough, right, is to identify all those spots.
Yeah.
And I think there are maybe even a few more where you could squeak a car through if you were really determined, is to really identify those and truly make them secure. One of the lessons from New Orleans was, you know, if there are ways to squeak around, a determined person will.
Yeah. I'd like to be involved in the stakeholder meeting when that time comes. Hopefully I'll be able to make it. If not myself, you know, maybe one of the other downtown at-large councilors could attend in my place. I do think that it's important to have a representative of the people there. I hear Councilor Stott's point as well around neighbors and business owners. However, I feel a little differently about it. My position on that for something like a walking a walkthrough with the designer. Does not feel to me like we need residents and business owners there right then at that time. I think that there's probably a way to fold them into the process once we have a little bit more specificity around what the plan is looking like and to garner their input. But I think that ultimately this is a public safety matter and we would want to support a public safety driver. And I think that it really will come down to layering in those folks and getting their level, building up their level of awareness and getting their input at a time that feels really appropriate when we have something we can actually talk about and look at and point to. But I would also say that the communication, yet again, you have heard me on my soapbox about communication quite a bit. I do believe that those folks need to be heavily communicated with. It is not uncommon, regardless of what the rules are, and I know it because I have done this myself when I worked at 6 Central Street for the Salem Partnership many years ago, for folks that work on the pedestrian mall to drive up if they have a large mailing, that they have to do, or if they've got a bunch of office supplies that they picked up on their way home or whatever, and just bringing it in themselves, or if it's Eric over at the, his place on the pedestrian mall needs to drop off a bunch of foam or something. It's not uncommon for passenger vehicles to break the law to do deliveries, and I would suggest our business owners are often the folks that do that. So I appreciate it, and I definitely think communication is going to be incredibly key with that group. I agree also that we should definitely look at the ordinance around further restricting delivery hours. That having been said, I will offer to the group here that a lot of that has to do with the fact that you can literally only fit so many very, very large delivery trucks on the pedestrian mall at one time safely with other people. And so giving a larger swath in the morning for deliveries that happen after 8 a.m. because you can't have loud sounds, right? Trash pickup can't happen. None of that can happen until after the noise ordinance comes off. And then you have a series of deliveries that have to occur, so there's a bunch of hours in the morning. I do agree that no major delivery should be happening in the evening, so maybe we can talk through that if there's a real need to have those hours made available, but I definitely think we should take that up as part of this conversation, although I know it's not the matter tonight. Looking at my notes. I think that's what I have. I think additional questions will come with further design work for myself personally, but I am in support of this, and I appreciate it a lot. And I think it's a great solution because I know you can't be everywhere all the time, PD, and I know that we have a lot of violators, and enforcement is an issue in a lot of other ways. So if this is something that we can do that is highly controllable, that we can then find capacity for you all to enforce elsewhere and do your jobs in other ways, let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. I had first seen Andy Varela's hand up, and then Councilor Harvey, I see you as well. So, Councilor Varela, hold on one moment. Okay, Councilor Varela.
All right, thank you, Chair Merkel, not being a member of the committee. So, in talking about this, I'm obviously for the bollards. I think this is great, but I'm a little concerned about the conversation that's happening about the limitation of hours when it comes to vehicles, specifically commercial vehicles. When it comes to deliveries, being someone that is in the industry of delivering food to entities within the city, it's sometimes hard for some of these companies, including me, to meet those times when it comes to a delivery, especially during haunted happenings. It can also be problematic. And we don't want to stymie our businesses here because we're limiting hours. And sometimes there's emergencies where people need their provisions. So obviously, I know this conversation is about the bollards, and I think we should keep to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Harvey?
Thank you, Chair. I guess going back to what Councilor Masillo was asking in regards to, the cost of $80,000. Again, I'm in support of this also, but looking at this, it says construction observation. To what extent are they going to be available during the construction process of this? Because if you go to lines where what they say they don't include, it says full-time construction administration on the last page. So being in the industry, nothing holds up a job more than somebody on the construction site with a question, and they say, well, we got to get the answer from this person. And they, it ends up on somebody's desk for 3 weeks and holds up the project, which ultimately costs the project more money. So in regards to, like Councilor Marcillo was saying, if they're going to be hands-on per se, as far as, if I'm the contractor and I have a question, I get my answer within 48 hours, then that's great for the added expense. But if it's going to take 3 weeks to get an answer from, so I'm just curious as to what their availability is going to be, where they say construction observation. So technically, are they managing the project for us, or are they just going to look from afar and say, oh yeah, if you understand where I'm going with that?
In some of the discussions we had, there was focus on, for certain installations that they oversee, like for some of the static stuff where you're just dropping in concrete bases, doing that kind of work. I don't think there needs to be as much. I think it's more so with the retractable pieces. I will certainly confirm that with them. We haven't signed off on this yet, so I can have them clarify what they mean by that, but you make a good point. We should make sure what are we paying for. So I'd say that having worked with this firm before, they've had a good presence. If they weren't on site, they had sent someone either that day or the next day, or they got an answer. So that's one reason I reached out to them, because of the experience I've had with them thus far. So I'll just leave that. So.
And my second question was, they also have on the list of what they're not doing is actual structural design for manufactured bollards. Are they going to spec out what they want for manufactured bollards, or is it, are they just washing their hands of that altogether, or is that not part of the design?
I think they would seek out vendors who have done this work before and fabricated it. But again, I will ask those questions for them to specify.
Yeah, because that just leads me to the question of who's coming up with the specs for what we want installed. Because I just did a park out in Worcester, and the bollards they put around the federal courthouse were pretty intense. And they were fixed bollards. They weren't retractables, but they ran into the same problem. And getting back to the underground and stuff like that, there was an N-star vault or an electrical vault right below where they wanted to put them. And, and these are set up. The bollards they installed were for exactly what Chief Miller was just talking about. A tractor trailer would stop a tractor trailer if they were trying to get through it. So again, specification, who's speccing out the product that we want installed? Is that part of the design, or is that going to be something else that the city has to come up with more money for, to basically hire somebody else to spec out what we want installed for the pedestrian walkway?
I'm not a construction engineer, but most of the bollard systems I've looked at, fixed or movable, manufacturer specs precise construction details, and this is where Bowman would be good to observe and make sure that they build according to those. Without that, they wouldn't guarantee the integrity of the bollard to stop anything. So the drawings I looked at were very particular in how much concrete, how much rebar. I suspect, I don't know that for sure, but I suspect that's where they would get that from. The bollard manufacturer would provide that to Bowman for that.
That being said, so Bowman's going to, with their design, it's going to basically have options of what they install as far as the bollards themselves, and they're going to go by the manufacturer specifications for their particular scenario that we're looking for.
Right, that'd be my understanding. There's challenges because there's a lot of underground utilities, and hopefully we can do this. They'll have to look at all that with the data that the city provides, and then maybe some surveying to some dig safe type things. But back to a couple of points, we want to do the least amount of movable bollards, and then we can back that up with fixed, all of the same rating. Some of these walkways, kind of leave that to fire to make the call on that, in my mind, whether or not they need access. So, like, this is Shirley Cervoni walkway. It's closed off now. It's not necessarily crash rated, but it's closed off, and we've lived with that for many years now. So I think we could probably keep that closed off, but I would defer to fire. And then the same question on Derby Square and Central Street would have to be answered. Like, what access do they need? Other than that, like, we can kind of adapt to the access, but I think fire is the one that trumps it for access with the fire trucks.
And one last thing, in the ordinance, does it specify, like, do we need all entrances to the pedestrian walkway available for delivery trucks, or can we limit it to enter and exit in certain spots, so that we don't have it basically like a free-for-all whenever they're doing their deliveries coming in 3 different directions? I mean, could we, I don't even know if it is that way yet or now, but is that something we could possibly look at as far as delivery trucks enter and out, exit from one location?
Yeah, it's, as we know, it's one way. Not everyone follows that, but it's one way, westbound. Yeah, it's something we could look at along with the hours, is access points, what's being offered.
So I think if we had access points, it would limit the amount of retractables we actually had. We could put more fixed in.
Right, that's a possibility.
Because the emergency vehicles obviously would know what's going on.
But in the ordinance right now, it doesn't specify any of that, just the times.
I had a question about timelines and expectations. I appreciated the points that were made too about possible barriers in things that might hold up the project, contractors and additional oversight. What are we trying to look at? I know the goal is always, of course, haunted happenings, if that's real, but I also know how long it can take for projects to move forward, and that's also not our only event. We have at the Salem Arts Festival, 4th of July, all kinds of activities. So I was wondering if there is any, vision looking forward in the hopes of when they would get this study done, the length of time it would get, something would get in place, what we're trying to look at.
I'm going to talk about the time, and then I'll talk about other projects.
In our discussions, and these gentlemen can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we were thinking we'd have an interim plan for this year. I don't think we'd have the whole thing done between doing the kickoff and getting the materials. As you can imagine, these things are probably being ordered all over the country now as a result of what took place. So, and we've experienced delays in equipment. So I think the goal is to have an interim thing in place this year with the goal of getting it in place well before next October. But I don't have specific timelines yet.
Yes, of course. So if I heard you right, the goal for a plan for this year, and it would be 2026, to even get in place. And really good point too. I'm sure we're not the only municipality, having this discussion and wanting this equipment and materials. Yes, Chief Miller.
Of course, from a public safety standpoint, I'd like it done as soon as possible. I realize there are realities that interfere with that. In thinking about haunted happenings this year, whether or not this is completed, there will be other areas of the city where there's an increased, where I'd like to increase the level of security. To that end, we'll be employing more of those mobile vehicle barriers. We have a couple of them. They're kind of yellow. Unfortunately, they do look like tripping hazards. But they're designed so that if a car hits them, they kind of cantilever up and move the wheels off the ground. I'm seeking to buy more of those, and we can discuss that when we talk about the capital improvement budget. But I'm also seeking to borrow some from other municipalities for our very busy events, because even if we're able to secure the pedestrian mall absolutely perfectly, right? Come October, we're going to have crowds beyond that boundary. So these are important considerations.
Yes, I've seen those in my neighborhood, actually on my street. They're effective, and I appreciate this plan, all the efforts I'm watching you constantly do. You're really quick on the spot decisions. Closing streets, the giant vehicles on each end. There's no access, so I appreciate all the efforts that have been going on, and the vision moving forward, and that continues. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Mazzillo.
Thank you, Chair. Chief, one question. You spoke about the next on the list is the comment, which is great. Do you have a timeline for when that planning is going to start? And then
I don't. We haven't even had a meeting about it. The first meeting was to discuss the pedestrian mall. The next meeting, which is coming up with the mayor, is to talk about steps going forward for the common. As you can imagine, I think looking at the common, the gates appear to provide a modicum of security, but they really don't. I think a truck would go through any one of those individual gates, and many of the gates are, I shouldn't say gates, fences. Many of the fence sections are down anyway, so that really is, it's next on my list of worries, let's put it that way. But what security looks like, what vehicle denial looks like for an area that big, I'll be honest, any one you choose is incredibly expensive. Off the top of my head, I estimated you'd need about 700 fixed barriers if you were going to ring the common with barriers. And they're, each barrier is more than $1,000. So obviously we will try to find the most cost-effective way to do it, but it's going to be a problem.
do you have anything else on your list? Do you ever anticipate looking at this sort of movable barrier for streets that are regularly closed?
I would love to. Those mobile barriers, again, off the top of my head, I think a single mobile barrier costs north of $200,000. So that's and then, that you can still drive around that, right? You need more barriers to back that up. So this is a very expensive prospect. So I think ideally, yes, but we have to spend wisely.
Mm-hmm. So this is kind of the test case then for hardening off an area.
I think I'll try to be brief. I think, as I said, making everybody at an event invulnerable to vehicles is just not possible. If you think about Midtown Manhattan, right, the number of people crossing the street at any moment is in the hundreds. But what the priority for me, though, is making the places that appear safe actually safe. And we necessarily are going to start with the smallest area that such as the pedestrian mall, and then we will expand as we can.
Any other questions from the council? No? And looking at Councilor Varela online, I don't see a raised hand, and I don't see anyone from the public. And let me just check. There's any attendees, which is no. So, yes, any other thoughts, comments, questions? Okay, Councilor Watson-Felt.
Thank you, Chair Merkel. I would motion that we return this to the council with a positive recommendation for approval of the cost.
Councilor Harvey.
Second it.
Okay. All in favor to send this back, the $80,000 in funds for the Bullard study, going back to the full council with a positive recommendation? All in favor? I see 4 hands plus my own. And this moves forward with a positive recommendation. And before I ask for another motion, I want to thank you all. Thank you for attending, and really for going above and beyond, always for public safety. I've always found it remarkable what goes on here when I moved here, for the crowds and the activities and the festivities that go on in Salem. And I want to appreciate you being here tonight and the work that's going into this. Thank you. Any other motions? Councilor Harvey?
Make a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn. All in favor? Okay, motion adjourned.